So today I'm going to be taking a unique but pretty straightforward approach in describing more technical information about the planet, which are the parts of our psyche, the parts of our perception that need some outlet for expression. So we talked about the sun being the ego, and kind of how we want to be seen. We talked about the moon a bit being our internal nature, how we deeply process things, etc. And so I'm going to map this out, the 7 traditional planets, not the outer planets beyond Saturn. I'm going to map this out in terms of days of the week. Can't draw too fast with this thing. Gotta take our time. And I'm also going to be doing something similar with the houses today and with the signs if we get to it. But usually my talk on houses takes a while. So for the planets, Sunday, Moon Day, Martes in Spanish. Tuesday is Mars Day. Miércoles, Mercury, Wednesday. Always forget how to draw Jupiter. Let me get, people do it in different ways. Let me get like a super precise from here. I was never into visual art. I mean, I'm into it. I just don't do it. Yeah. Yeah, more of a, less of a 4, more of an 8. Go like that. So Jupiter, Thursday. Venus, Friday. Saturn Day. So Sunday is the beginning of the week. It's the first day of the week, technically. And the sun, representing that kind of center of the solar system, center of our personality, self-centeredness, ego, someone who's egotistical, very sun-oriented, is self-centered, right? Being the first day of the week, Sunday is the first part of ourselves that we acknowledge as being individual, because it's our sense of individuality, our sense of identity, how we want to be seen. And so it's that first sense of self, and if somebody's not like really on a path of self-development, then they're kind of going to be stuck here. They're going to be stuck with the sun, that kind of surface sense of self. There's going to be a lot of want. with regard to how they construct their identity in their minds and what they want to project to others, the energy they want to put out. The sun puts out energy. It provides light and heat and energy and a central place of orbit for the rest of the solar system. It's a gravitational force. And someone who has a lot of outward attractiveness, I mean, most often that comes from the sun and its aspects in the birth chart. Leo sun people, for better or for worse, depending on where they are in their path of self-development, self-awareness. Leo sun people cannot be missed. They're visible. Leo is the ruling sign of the sun. So the sun likes to be in Leo because it has a very natural self-expression there. Cancer, by contrast, which comes right before Leo, has kind of a smaller ego. It's the maternal instinct of the zodiac, Cancer. Now, I mean, you can be outgoing, you can be extroverted and be a Cancer sun person. Depends on how the sun is aspected in the chart, what else is going on, what your rising sign is. Depends on everything else, No two Leos are the same, no two Cancers are the same. But there's a degree to which a Leo sun person can't be missed, right? And because they like the attention that they get, they tend to stay there for a while, right? It takes a while for them to dig a little bit deeper into themselves than, say, a Scorpio sun person who is trying to go deeper, but because of the private world that they construct in which to do that, they can kind of end up similarly egotistical, weirdly enough. And any sign is prone to being egotistical if they're not working on themselves, right? But the sun is that central part of the solar system. But remember, everything in astrology is geocentric, not heliocentric. We calculate our chart from the perspective of us when we were born, when that umbilical cord was cut, when we got our first sense of autonomy. We took that first breath and took that first influx of oxygen into our brain and throughout our body without the help of our mother. Okay, that birth time is what decides basically what our perceptual style is going to be like from that point on. And so the sun it's that surface self, or that energetic self, right? First day of the week. Moon, once you dig a little bit deeper in yourself, you discover your moon sign in astrology. You're like, oh, now maybe astrology is starting to make sense because it represents something deeper. All right. So we'll go planet. Now, just to be clear, when I say ruling sign, it's not that Leo and the sun have any actual connection, like any more so than Cancer and the sun. It's just that when you break down the traits of Leo and the traits of the sun, they represent some of the same things. They have some of the same styles of projection. But remember, the sun is that part of our personality that represents the ego. Leo is a style of expression. And they're both very warm. They're both very stable. And so when you have two warm, stable things working together in coherence, it tends to be just more of what both things already are, right? Similarly with the moon. So Monday, second day of the week, second level of personal development. Once you're kind of digging into astrology or digging into yourself, you might access something resembling your moon sign. Now, an introverted person is more likely to discover their moon sign earlier, okay, than a really extroverted, like Leo sun person who has like a lot of fire and air in their charts. Remember, fire and air are both extroverted energies, and they are putting off more energy than they're taking in. They're reacting to things and maybe thinking more about them later. They'd rather, act now, not ask for permission, apologize later if it goes wrong. Okay. So Sun is kind of an extroverted part of our personality, but it can be in an introverted sign. It can be in Cancer, a water sign, an earth sign. And so the ego is kind of going to be more hidden, more self-contained. But the moon is that part that, like, maybe a more introverted person more quickly is kind of in tune with, or it depends on how the sun and the moon signs are actually related. Maybe they're in the same place. Maybe they're in beautiful coherence with one another in some way or another, and they're working together from the start, right? Taurus person's going to come off very much that element, earth, very stable, very sure of themselves, not really question, is this right? Is this wrong? They're going to be very action oriented for a Taurus person, but they're going to have an earthy, stable style to their personality. And they're going to be very consistent. Someone whose sun and moon are working together really well is a very consistent individual. So moon is our deeper part of ourselves that processes things. It's how we think, how we feel, and how we protect ourselves, kind of from a maternal perspective. So Cancer is represented by the crab, which has its two claws out like this, and it's trying to contain things, and it has its little snippers that it uses to guard whatever it is in its possession, right? So that's the part of ourselves that's kind of doing that with whatever thoughts come our way, right? With whatever we feel. The sign that our moon is in is going to give us a style of processing things, especially when we're by ourselves, because moon is really when we're by ourselves. We don't have the influence of other people around. It's the private self. It's the more domestic side of ourselves. Cancer is domestic. It's private. It's protective. So the moon is kind of where we seek safety. It's our style of nurturing in a way. But similarly, wherever we have Cancer in our chart, everyone has Cancer in their chart. You may not have a planet in Cancer, but Cancer is going to be in a house somewhere, which represents an area of life that you see in a Cancerian kind of style. And we'll get to that when we talk about the houses. So private self, outgoing self, Mars. Maybe the third phase of development is taking action, right? First, we realize that we exist. We have a sense of self, our sun. We have a reserve of energy somewhere that we're drawing from. That's what the sun gives us. The moon is kind of how we process things, because things are happening in the world, and we have to use our private space to kind of recalibrate and to make sense of things. And then Mars is about taking action. We're still not in the realm of kind of thinking yet, because even the moon can be a little reactive, right? Like the moon is where you get triggered. You feel something deeply, and you can either pause and process that further, or you can just act on that reaction. Mars. But so far we've kind of gone masculine, feminine, masculine in a more traditional way of understanding. I don't always use those terms. They seem to be kind of loaded. I like to use like extroverted, introverted, extroverted, right? Fire and air being extroverted, earth and water being more introverted. So this is our sense of competition, because like if we react to something on the moon level, there's this competitive spark within us that we want to do something, right? We want to move. So Mars is about movement as well. Mars is also about primal urges, sexual energy, outgoing sexual energy, especially for men. And then for women, it's the same thing, but what it translates to is the style of energy that the woman is attracted to in a partner, regardless of her sexual orientation. But the partner is going to represent something more masculine than she is on some level, if that makes sense. So it's what she's seeking to, again, we can travel backwards here too, because this leads to this leads to this, but then Mars can also offer a context for this to feel safe. The moon needs to feel safe, whether you're a man, woman, whatever. Like we all seek a certain degree of safety. So Mars takes action. It's outgoing. Aries is the most stereotypically masculine sign. It's fire, which is the most masculine, most outgoing, extroverted element. And it is cardinal. So the cardinal modality, that's the role of taking that initial action, putting things into action, leadership, courage, forward thinking, start up, get it started, leave others to do the dirty work. Aries is kind of impulsive, likes to move fast. So like I have my Mars in the sign of Aries, in the ruling sign. I was a sprinter in high school. I ran the 100-meter dash and 200-meter dash. So like when Mars is in its ruling sign, it likes quick bursts of energy, and then it tires quickly. I can teach for 2 hours. I'm done for the rest of the day after that. Been conserving my energy all day for you guys. Because I need to, I have a lot of introverted energy in my chart, and then I have this, so I can give it all to that if I've used my, more introverted energy to like kind of conserve until now. Took a nap, never taking naps unless I really have something to do, all right, later. So Mars, any questions about Mars so far? We'll keep going. All right, so, oh no, Aries, Mars, like so impulsive, like did something that it didn't mean to do, okay? Think about it. All right, maybe I need to apologize. Mercury is about thought. It's about communication, okay? So we didn't communicate before we took action here, right? It's one of those inner planets between the sun and Earth. So it gets two ruling signs, Gemini and Virgo. Gemini and Virgo represent the two different but full embodiments of Mercury. Gemini is about information and language. It likes to play with words, play with ideas, but ideas in isolation, not always connecting the dots necessarily. Gemini is, kind of an extroverted sign generally. It is mutable, so it's very adaptable. So Gemini tends to, float between responsibilities. It likes variety. And so does our mind and our communication style. To be a good communicator, you have to be adaptable to different social environments, different kinds of personalities. And Gemini likes to do that. It likes to have a variety of different kinds of friends. So So Gemini is one of the rulers of Mercury. That's Mercury, again, never, from our perspective here on Earth, is never too far away from the sun, whether it's in front or beside it or behind it. It's no more than one sign away from the sun, from our perspective. So our communication style is helping our sense of identity express itself. It's always nearby. Our style of communication has to be within proximity of our identity. And that's what the physical proximity of Mercury to the sun represents, is our ability to communicate being somewhere near our sense of self, which is what the sun represents. And Virgo is the more discerning, more fine-tuning side of Mercury. So it's more introverted because it's an earth sign. And it's also mutable. It's also adaptable. It can take on lots of different tasks. Both of these signs, if you are one of these people or you know someone who has lots of energy in one of these two signs, they tend to be able to multitask pretty well. So Mercury is also about information systems, having lots of tabs open on your web browser, being on like Reddit. Lots of Geminis and Virgos are on Reddit, if you know what that is. Whether they're lurkers or they comment. Yeah. And Reddit's just like this abundance of information, community contributions to basically a library, encyclopedia of social chaos, as well as useful information that you can get about anything. There's a subreddit for anything that you could think of, basically. They're also the types of people who like to read Wikipedia a lot. Somebody who has a lot of Mercury energy. If there are lots of things intimately connected to Mercury, you might be considered a mercurial person, right? Someone of the mind, someone of who's tech savvy. Both of them tend to be good editors. Virgo tends to be more of a word editor, book editor type. Gemini can tend to be more of a media editor, but there's overlap. I know Geminis who have more of a broad range of media sources that they have mastery over, while Virgos are kind of more confined to language itself, but can also be really good at mathematics, language, left-brained, but in an adaptable way. So let's move on to Thursday, the day of Jupiter. Sagittarius. And so before we discovered the outer planets, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, there were, I'll write the secondary rulers down here, the other traditional rulers. All right. Traditional. Sun and moon are alone. So I'll go back to Mars real quick, because this is important, and I do consider traditional rulership as well. So whereas Mars is that kind of more raw masculine part of ourselves, and Aries obviously represents those things because it likes to run headfirst into things all the time. Scorpio is more like the feminine, the deep psychological, more thought out feminine side of Mars and our raw masculinity. So the most stereotypically, outgoing and masculine sign being cardinal. So, leadership oriented, and fire. Scorpio is water, the most feminine or most yin element that we have, and fixed modality. Fixed is the most stereotypically feminine modality that we have. So in a way, Scorpio is kind of the most feminine sign in its concern with depth, possession, psychological competition. Okay. Aries likes to go to war with a sword or with a gun or with its fists. Scorpio wants to go to war psychologically. Okay. How do women try to destroy each other covertly, psychologically? Men get in bar fights. Women ruin each other's reputations. That's what Scorpio likes to do. So Scorpio is great at planning, but it's also good at scheming, right? It's the same thing. It depends on your intention. That's the only difference. Planning and scheming are the same, depending on your intention. So a well-developed Scorpio, what a useful human being. An underdeveloped Scorpio, what a nightmare. You know? I mean, same thing with Aries because of the blunt force style of its personality, right? But at least they cool off as quickly as they heat up, and they're kind of forgivable, you know? So this is kind of a secondary way of thinking about Mars, like a more feminine way of thinking about this masculine energy, right? So there's perfect balance in the gender spectrum, we'll say, in astrology. And then over here, traditionally also Pisces. So Jupiter is all about learning. It's all about the intellect. Whereas this is information, Mercury is information, words, media, communication. Jupiter connects the dots. It's about the idea of the thing. It's about patterns. So once we connect the right dots in life, you know, if our Jupiter in our chart is in a good place, we start to attract things because we're being authentic and we're living in accordance with our maybe philosophical purpose. People who have Sagittarius and Piscean energy, they like to learn for the sake of learning. They like ideas. I have plenty of friends with plenty of energy in both of these signs. No wonder I was a philosophy major. So, you know, I'll sit with them and like have a scotch and just talk about philosophy for hours. And even I will ask them, why do you ask this question? Why do you want to know this? You know, like, why do you want to pick my brain about this? Or why do you want to have a discussion? They're like, oh, I don't know. I mean, you know, just to like maybe keep it in my back pocket, you know, maybe it'll be useful someday, but I just like to learn for the sake of learning, you know? But that's what Jupiter likes to do. It doesn't really have a plan. It's kind of how the dots are connected once the plan is going well. This is the plan. And then you dial this back to take action in a more planned out way, right? Once you get to this level of development, right? And then you can move forward again, right? So we're always like taking a step back, taking a few steps forward. So Sagittarius, connecting dots. The information is starting to make sense because the dots are connecting. I'm seeing the bigger picture. Jupiter is all about seeing the bigger picture. And therefore, it's about attracting abundance because it's the Jupiter, like I said last time, is the largest planet in the solar system. It is as big as all the other planets combined, and it puts out more energy than it takes in. So Jupiter is also about sharing that knowledge and teaching, right? It's the intellect. And Sagittarius, on a baseline level, we could say really digs Jupiter, and Jupiter really digs Sagittarius. So Jupiter's pretty happy when in Sagittarius because Sagittarius is a fire sign. Fire is putting out energy. So you do see Sagittarius energy in lots of professors, teaching professions. But putting out energy, you know, when you become too intellectual, that's mismanaged. You can become hedonistic. Sagittarius can put out. It's very interesting. Fire is sexual. Fire is expressive. It's creative. And so Sagittarians are very idea oriented. If they overwhelm themselves with like too many ideas, they're like, oh my God, what do I do? What do I focus on? I don't have like maybe a principled like moral structure for this to fit in. Meaning doesn't exist. I'm gonna become a hedonistic nihilist, just in its underdeveloped state. But the same is true of Pisces. Okay, Pisces being the 12th sign of the zodiac. In a way, it's the most developed spiritually. But all that means is that if you're an underdeveloped Pisces, these big ideas that you're inclined toward are going to be wrong, and you're going to be a bit of an asshole. Anybody could be an asshole. But a Jupiterian person tends to be very jovial, very likable. Sagittarians, Piscean people, these are both mutable signs, so they're adaptable. They tend to be fun people to be around, people who have a lot of energy in these signs. Big-hearted, loving. Pisces in a more soft, watery way. It's a water sign. They come off more feminine. Sagittarius in a more warm way. Pisces is a sign, just a little side note, that I see very often. Pisces sun marries Pisces sun person. Very common. Some signs are always looking for something different. But there's, because of the Jupiterian nature, the connect the dots kind of nature with this, sometimes the Pisces or Sagittarius ego, if their sun is in one of these signs, it has an idea of how the world kind of works, and they feel like they're only understood by other people who get their mind because they're so mentally oriented. So like they need a good mental connection. Talk more about Jupiter later. The further out you get, the more nuanced the planets are, in a way. The further in, the more conscious they are. The clearer they are to the eye. Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay.
What day does Pisces start? In February, right?
Yeah. It depends when the sun actually goes into that sign, but it'd be February 22nd, 23rd. Yeah. Yeah. That's why the birth time is important. That's why the birth time is important. Because sometimes like the date will be the 21st and the sun's actually moving over at 3:03 p.m., right? And whether your sun is in the previous sign or the sign it's moving into that's what we call a true cusp. Whenever you're you're born within a few hours while the sun is actually moving over into that next sign. So to have like a sun on the 29th degree moving over into that next sign, the person's sense of self is going to be a bit conflicted. They're going to feel like they should be the next sign because they feel this magnetic pull into that next sign. But they know that they're still kind of something else, You could be a true cusp. You could be right on the 0th degree or right on like 29th and 59 minutes. And it creates some complications, but also some unique power within the individual to embody kind of a dual personality. I tend not to. Cusps are like their own, is its own topic. I tend not to agree with the people who say, oh, if you're born within like just a few days of the sun moving over, then you're still a cusp. You might feel that energy in a unique way, that next energy, but it's not going to be integral to your sense of self, if that makes sense. So you'll just have to see exactly which day, on whatever year you're looking into, when exactly the sun moves over, what time. So Venus Yay, freaking weekend. Recreation, social life, romance, plan a big date for Friday night. The work week is over, but you still might work on Friday, and you might be doing something that you love on Friday. So Friday itself has this dual personality where it's part work, part play. And Venus needs part work, part play, because while it's romance and your preferences and what you like and dislike and your romantic style, it can't be all play because play needs something to support it. Which is why Taurus, stable bull or ox of Taurus in an earth sign, providing earth a grounding for Venus to express itself. Taurus is the first ruling sign of Venus. And then Libra represents the other. So Aries kind of represents the self, like initially kind of only cares about itself. That's why it acts so impulsively and it's so fiery, kind of like naturally egocentric. Opposite Aries is Libra. Libra is about the other. So an underdeveloped Aries, just like really impulsive, just maybe literally just lighting stuff on fire constantly. Libra, underdeveloped, always putting everyone first and neglecting their own self to the point of just being walked all over, On the positive side, they're extremely likable, charming, again, like great party guests. They're always thinking about the other person. It's more, not so much like group orientation or family, but like one-on-one relationships, whether it's family, a lover, a friend. They're very, very loyal, very dedicated to giving. And so is Venus. Venus is the part of ourselves that gives. So Taurus, earth, feels, physical sensation, needs a sense of belonging in the physical. Right? The bull needs a stable ground on which to stand. And the bull can provide that ground for a pack of cows. Right? But it needs a stable ground because it's big, it contains a lot of energy. And whatever ground it stands on needs to be able to support whenever Taurus does get moving. So finds its sense of belonging in the physical sensation. Libra finds its sense of belonging in the other, in other people and in connections, very people oriented. So those represent the two sides of Venus. Venus is about sensation. It's about sensuality, romance, connection, love, social style. Remember, Venus is also an inner planet between the Earth and the Sun. So it never ventures too far away from Mercury and the Sun. So it's doing another part to support our central sense of self, our ego, and working in communication with our communication style. So Venus is never really more than 2 signs away from the Sun. We'll see that when we look at our charts. Because we are social beings, right? Venus is our social self, and we need to communicate. Those two things are integral. Our action-taking self, Mars, is more independent. Mars is our sense of independence, So once we dive deep into our moon self, we maybe feel perhaps a superficial sense of independence and we act on it kind of impulsively. And then we have to kind of dial it back, right? Oh, back to the moon. Okay. Communicate. Okay. Communication requires another person. All right. What's our relationship to that? So now we're getting to know how to work with other people. and we move back and take action in a more grounded way. And then we move forward, we start to connect the dots of that information more. We become more intelligent in the way that we move through life. And then we move forward again. Our ideas are solidified more by the facts that we continue to gather, the things that we continue to learn on the individual level, on the material level even. Virgo loves material reality. You see Virgo a lot in the material sciences and biology and geology. Taurus as well. The earth signs have a connection with the earth when they're healthy. I knew this dude who had a Virgo stellium. Stellium is a collection of 3 or more planets in one sign, in one place, that are all just, when one of them is engaged, all of them are engaged. It's good because it's powerful. You have a lot of things going on in one sign. So in a sense, you know who you are in that regard. But it also can cause one to be very narrowly focused in one area of life. And so talk about the most, Virgo being earth and mutable meaning like adaptable and like kind of scattered, being able to multitask when it's good. It can also be really messy, right? If there's a lot of Virgo energy, because we think of Virgo as like kind of neat and tidy, likes a real neat space. But if there's too much Virgo, you can be really, really messy. And Virgo is another sign, like Pisces. Virgo suns marry Virgo suns more often than the other signs. And when that happens, their space is anything but neat and tidy. You see like an overabundance of Virgo ego energy and just like pack rat tendencies. And so this dude, he never wore shoes, like ever. Earth, connected to the earth. Never had a job, ever, right? Like no sense of grounding. Virgo needs a grounding. But like the opposite traits that you would think Virgo has tend to manifest whenever there's an overabundance of a sign, too much focus in one place. And that tends to affect the opposite sign as well. Virgo and Pisces are in opposition with one another. They're opposite signs. They kind of represent 2 poles. So where I said Virgo, there are lots of biologists, people who have to do with, information and material reality. They specialize in something like that. Pisces is about more Jupiter things, less about information and more about big picture, more about spirituality. So if you have too much earth, too much concern with the physical, you may neglect mental health, right, or spiritual health. Because Pisces is more consciously concerned with spiritual health. Virgo is more consciously concerned with physical health, even if that means a complete neglect of it, if that makes sense.
Is that just because it's so strong within that person that it's difficult for them to focus on it in a way or something?
And to keep it organized.
Yeah.
Because Virgo is really organized.
Uh-huh.
And so if Virgo is going to see that there are too many things to organize if there's a lot of Virgo energy, because there are lots of parts. If there are multiple planets in Virgo, there are multiple parts of that person's psyche and their perception focusing on too many things, and it becomes overwhelming, right? It's information overload. So that kind of good Virgo mercurial nature can't be put to use in a practical way.
And it's because they focus in on the one specific, the idea, but it's too many of the ideas. And with the Pisces energy, they can look at it in more broader terms.
Right. Okay. Exactly. And so Virgo will tend to
terms.
Right. Okay. Exactly. And so Virgo will tend to overgeneralize, which is what Pisces naturally does, but in a useful way if it's healthy, right? Will overgeneralize and with the lack of the specific attention that it needs on specific things. Uh-huh. And so mental health is gonna spin out of control just as much as the material health.
Yes.
So anyway, Venus. All right. So Venus is more the tangible, sensual side of our connection. Venus is about connection, you know, and Taurus connects to the earth, and Libra connects to others. Saturn Day. The best. Thinks it's the best. Sagittarius and Capricorn think they're the best, by the way. Just a little factoid for you. Primarily, Capricorn rules Saturn, which is going to intuitively make more sense as we talk about Saturn. Aquarius kind of represents that other side of Saturn that a lot of modern astrologers don't recognize, but what the chart is just a big set of polarities. And all is one. Reality itself is not polar. Otherwise, we would say realities themselves are polar. Right? Reality is one thing, and it contains all the polarities that exist. Okay. So I like to think of things in terms of polarities astrologically, because astrology even isn't perfect. That's where free will comes in, right? We have to, not that we're going to assert our free will in a perfect way, but you are not your birth chart. Just to remind you, I mean, as much as I love astrology, we are more than what the physical space at the time of our birth indicates about our psyche. And so all Pisces people aren't the same. You know, a Pisces sun person on a spiritual path, lovely, enlightening, amazing conversational partner, wise individual. And that can be said about any developed sign and in their own unique way. Underdeveloped, you know, you can have two people who have the same exact chart, which doesn't happen, by the way. Your chart is unique to you. You're special. Don't worry. Two people hypothetically could have the same exact chart, and they could be very different people because of some environmental factors. Certain aspects of their personality weren't, you know, honed or paid attention to or cultivated by their nurturers or by themselves. You know, the better your parenting situation that you grow up with, what a good parenting situation means is that they help you to become yourself better, right? And they know when to let go instead of being like an over possessive, Oedipal, maternal cancer crab that wants to kind of possess things and snip at everything that tries to get at its young. You know, exposure therapy is important. Treat everything as exposure therapy in parenting, right? I don't have kids. I'm just making stuff up. So Saturn is the thing everyone kind of fears. Okay, oh my God, my Saturn return, turning 30 or turning 60, big change happening. So the Sabbath is on Saturday, not on Sunday. This is a Western thing that because of recreation, our indulgence, our extroversion, our, you know, need to have fun and express ourselves and be individuals and party and stuff and not really have like a rich private life, you know. Venus spun out of control Friday night. You're hungover, too hungover to go to church, you know. Okay, we have stuff to do on Saturday, college football, whatever. So I don't know when it was, but the Sabbath in the West was moved to Sunday. Interesting. The day of the sun, the day of the ego. The West is more extroverted. The West is more egocentric. You can be whatever you want to be. You can invent your own identity. So Western conceptions of spirituality, Western religions have gravitated toward more ego-centered expressions of spirituality over time in the West. And they've become less karmic, less about facing darkness. So Saturn, it represents the underworld because it represents karmas that are buried, that we bring into this life, that represent work that we have to do. And our Saturn returns represent the most major phases of change in our lives at ages 30 and 60. And those periods may have been easy for you if you've gone through one yet. I don't know. Oh, okay. You sure? I can't tell. I'm not an ageist. May have been easy for you if you have harmonious Saturn, but people tend to fear Saturn because it's like the wise old grandfather who's never wrong, or at least you're not in a place to, consider that he's wrong because he's just giving you the lessons that you need to hear. Or he speaks slowly, he speaks with confidence, he uses minimal wording, and it's about truth. It's about wisdom. And so Saturn in its more Capricorn form, like what we consider more stereotypical Saturn, is about that calm, cool-headed wisdom that we learn sometimes through crisis, sometimes through harmonious relations with others. It's easier for some than for others. Depends what your Saturn looks like in your chart. For me, the changes were pretty big, but they were easy because I have Saturn in a very strong place in my chart. For one of my best friends, it was a really tough time, but maybe even more meaningful because she got through all of those hardships in a way that raised her spiritual awareness and her self-awareness. So through doing Saturn work, you learn principle. You learn what's more true, not just for me, but for all. What's sustainable? Saturn is about sustainability. Capricorn as a sign is always thinking ahead, thinking far down the line. Doesn't care about pleasure and fun and what's going on right now. Capricorn's thinking ahead. It's cardinal, okay, so it's forward thinking. And it's earth, it's grounded, so it's practical, it's logical. So Capricorn wants as few distractions as possible when it comes to setting principles, planning for the future, and making things fall into place the way that perhaps God would have it, okay? Saturn day, the Sabbath, right? So there can tend to be this arrogance and this, also this self-centeredness with Capricorn, because a Capricorn heavy person, Saturn is about principles, moral truth, and then instilling those boundaries that are appropriate in order to fulfill those principles, to remain and to fine-tune those principles over time. And so Capricorn is, for self-preservation and for longevity, is drawing a boundary around itself and is saying nothing but this. It draws a boundary and it tries to keep everything out because it's a minimalist. The Aquarius side is trying to break down an existing boundary. So it may draw a boundary, but Aquarius wants to live outside of the boundary that it's observing or that it's creating. So there you get the kind of innovative nature of Aquarius. Saturn is about deep work, deep truth, deep wisdom. Aquarius somehow thinks it's like beyond that. So it's quirky, it's innovative, it comes up with wild ideas. A person who's midheaven, remember the more purpose, like career-oriented part of the self, if they have that in Aquarius, almost invariably that person goes into alternative fields of research, medicine, innovation, could be just some kind of entrepreneur, but is thinking outside the box. So Capricorn and Aquarius they tend to be a really good pair. First of all, they're side by side each other in the chart wheel. But they can share information because Capricorn is within the boundaries and minimizing its exposure to what isn't relevant to longevity and truth. And Aquarius is trying to find new routes around the boundaries. So you could see why actually these two signs could maybe not get along in certain cases, right? Because one of them like thinks it knows better because it has the boundaries and the principles figured out. And the other one says, oh, there's like some kind of social structure in here. That's bullshit. Let me like make up my own thing. Boom, communism. And then you draw an even tighter boundary by contrast, by consequence of that. So like any one of these can be hypocritical, put too much energy into like one idea or one stream of thought, then like the other end of the polarity just unconsciously manifests and bites you in the butt. So Capricorn tend to be very, very private, very serious, very disciplined. Aquarius people tend to be very aloof. Air, more extroverted. Okay, this is what a lot of Aquarius people don't like to admit, because they want to be seen as unique. They want to be seen as unique within social circles, social groups. Okay. But that depends on the group's existence. Like they're dependent on others in order to be unique to begin with. All right. Like in order to be unique, you need other people to exist. And then if they don't give you the attention that you want, then you can, I don't know, kind of get bitter or whatever. Capricorn get bitter too. Capricorn's like bitter flavors. Aquarius develops a taste for bitter flavors over time. So Saturn, and it's about boundaries. It's about discipline. It's about, someone with a Saturn that's underdeveloped is going to have lots of rules or no rules. And either way, it's wrong, right? Someone with a really developed Saturn is always learning about fine-tuning their principles, their moral compass, so that the rules that they adopt are adaptable for the right circumstances, and they work. So they give Capricorn the practical value it wants, and the sort of adaptable, variety that Aquarius wants, being an air sign that kind of moves about, even though it has a stubbornness to it because it's fixed. Aquarius is fixed. So it's kind of stale air. Aquarius is represented by the kind of like genderless being up in the cloud, pouring the water of truth onto people down on earth, right? It wants to be objective. It wants to see things from above, see the boundaries from above, the rules from above, and act like it's not affected by them, right? Capricorn is like kind of the king down there managing the boundary itself, maybe with the help of Leo, represented by the lion, the king of the pack. Yeah. Capricorns and Leos tend to work really well together in business. So anyway, that's Saturn, boundaries, principles more deeply. Because you learn principles at those Saturn return moments. At any major point in life and it doesn't have to be your Saturn return, it can be some other major thing going on with your Saturn. That's a time where, your principles, like the baseline rules that you have for yourself, are being called into question, and that you're going to if you're acting intentionally, you're going to try to cohere those personal principles with what is more divine. So, anybody need to see this for any longer? Good. It's a little more about the planets. Any questions right now before we start the next section? Okay, cool. So first, this is a super beautiful yet generic template for a birth chart. So we're going to break this down into hemispheres. Each hemisphere of the chart has special significance. So your ascendant, descendant, axis. This is the horizon. What is above the horizon represents outer, more visible aspects of the self. Bottom hemisphere below the horizon, unseen, more private aspects of the self and areas of life. The left half of the chart, this is the eastern horizon, by the way, the ascendant, where things come into focus. So if you have something around here, the 12th house. 12th house is things that are unknown and unknowable because the sun is so bright right when it rises. For the first 2 hours, it can be blinding. So any planets that are on the horizon represent things that are kind of hidden. And the 12th house itself represents things that are hidden.
So what you're saying is if you have planets in the 12th house, then those things will be hidden to you?
They can be very conscious to you.
Okay.
Yes, depending on what they are, how they're connected to other things in the chart. We'll talk a lot about the 12th house. I'm thinking about dedicating at least half of a class at some point to the 12th house, which is something that I don't know of any other astrologers that would do that because people tend to not understand it very well. So they add some very conventional attributes and understandings to the 12th house, without going very deeply into it. But my clients who show up for me tend to have 12th house and Saturn issues. That's what they're really looking for. They're looking for principle. They're looking for something well beyond the physical. And that's also what the 12th house represents in a way, is things beyond the physical. Talk more about this in a minute, but the first 11 houses represent material reality in one way or another. The 12th house is kind of jammed in here because this is a system of polarities, and the 12th house is the place where polarities go away because it's about unknowable things, right? The deepest or broadest, most abstract things. And the things where like human motivation, like the motivation itself can't be broken down into like, oh, I just have like this physical inclination or this like biological urge to do this or that. Like 12th house things, you can't explain things in those terms. The rules of language and logic don't apply. You got to be like really zen to kind of hone in on the 12th house. So before we go too deeply into there, the left half of the chart, self. Right half of the chart, the western horizon, others. So whatever sign is your rising sign, that's the sign that's coming into view at the time of your birth. And so it represents you when you're coming into view. So actually, this might be a good time to bring up some charts. See if we can match some rising signs with any physical appearances here. Or fashion senses, because it also has to do with like how you dress, right? Like how you come into view, you might have just a natural style that you gravitate toward. I'm Capricorn rising. I tend to dress very simply, but it's Tuesday, so I'm wearing red. That's the structured part of my mind, But like usually black shoes, like simple jeans, usually dark colors. Capricorn's the underworld. It's dark. It's like all about the private self and one's private sense of logic and understanding. Not as extroverted, unless you have Mars and Aries and Venus and Gemini. So the sign that's coming into view represents remember, signs represent style of expression. Like you're not a Cancer, you're not a Virgo, you're not a Sagittarius. You have Sagittarian style. If your sun is in Sagittarius, your ego is being expressed in a Sagittarian Jupiter type style, based on all the traits that we talked about with Sagittarius and Jupiter, right? So your ascendant is what you project. It's an anchoring point for your appearance. And so the first house the word that's typically used, if you had to use one word, is the self. So you become something that has a self when you're born. You begin to share your own space at a particular time, occupy space apart from your mother's womb. You take that first breath of oxygen on your own, autonomously. And so a self is produced. And for whatever reason, again, I'm a philosophy guy. Don't ask me why it happens or how, right? I'm giving you some reasons, but astrology is a metaphysical subject, right? We're talking about patterns that have been realized over thousands of years. It's not about like, oh, we have like this and we can test that. Well, institutional science is not keen on astrology, although if they were, we would have plenty of academic data to support plenty of things. I mean, I have my own data. I'll bring up some facts that I've recorded based on the clients that I've had, based on the research that I've come up with. I've already told you some of them, right? Pisces marrying Pisces sun people, Virgos marrying Virgo people. Those signs are in opposition with one another. There seems when, one is neglected or overused, the other is expressed in an equally unhealthy way. When one of them is in perfect balance and harmony, the other one is in perfect balance and harmony. It's kind of a game of seesaw between Virgo and Pisces. So there might be something about Virgo people and Pisces people being mutable and therefore sometimes feeling scattered because they're overwhelmed with how adaptable they can be and all the things that they attract on that basis, that they maybe need an anchoring point, someone who's just like them to give them that extra validation. It's okay to be a pack rat, Virgo, you don't have to be neat and tidy all the time. Pisces, you can be a miserable militant atheist. All right. You're not alone there. Pisces tend to be hardcore atheists early in life, tend to be super spiritual later in life. It's another little fact for you. All right. Ego stuff. Get over yourself, Come on, people. All right. So big concept here. All right. That I forgot to mention already. There is a progressive nature to how the houses progress through the chart wheel. Okay, we're intentional beings. We are built to grow, to improve ourselves, and we want to be moving forward. Okay, so the first house represents the first part of life, like right when we come out of the womb. Start the clock on life, boom, take a snapshot of how the planets are right at your time of birth, and that's yourself, your appearance comes into view, quite literally. Then what do you need? I'm going to say so many words I could choose from. I have a couple in mind. I don't know which one. Kate, I know it was a long time ago. A couple summers ago.
I love my notes.
Do you remember what word I used? Because maybe I'll use the other one. What word I used for the second house? Material? Okay. We'll say matter. You need to survive. All right. Human beings are born premature. Most other mammals, all of them that I can think of, are pretty much standing up and moving around once they're born. But we need survival. So the second house represents our survival. Your second house represents a style of providing for yourself. And so in the early stages of life, that comes through parenting. And so this is about touch. Babies need touch. They need to eat. They need some financial grounding from their parents. So the second house is about money, material things, material mechanisms for survival. It's the second house. Now there are 10 planets, 11 including the asteroid Chiron. I tend to use that. Many more, depending on what you want to include in your birth chart. There's the nodes. So there are only so many places in the chart where planets can show up. So if you don't have any planets in your first house, you tend to not put a whole lot of value on your sense of style, how you physically present yourself. I don't fix myself up when I go out. I don't have any conscious planets in my first house, for example. Second house, if you don't have any planets there, it just means you don't value material things that much. It doesn't necessarily say whether or not your parents provided for you or, your conditioning. Your chart is more about your predispositions, your psychological predispositions, because it's what you're born with. It's not what happens after you're born. What happens after you're born could be the result of how you are, right? Your parents may have treated you differently than they treated your sibling who grew up in the same house with the same rules, same things provided to them, same privileges. But maybe your parents reacted to you in a different way, and that's because you're projecting something different. And you're projecting your chart, more or less. Projecting your natural inclinations to perceive reality in a certain way onto the external world with your chart. The ascendant is where that starts. It's where your physical body comes into view. All right. Someone with a lot of planets in the first house, what does that look like? Lead singers of bands, narcissistic, generally, tendencies. Not saying if you have a bunch of planets in your first house, you're a narcissist. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying that you're very focused on yourself, what you look like, how you're coming into view, how you're rising above the horizon. Okay? And then the irony to that is that if you're too egotistical and you care too much about how you look, you cross this because all the planets over the course of the day move this way around the chart because this is the eastern horizon. So they come up like this, go around. Okay? The irony in being too self-centered, having a lot of first house stuff, is that you immediately go in 12th house where nothing can be like rationally understood or seen because it's so bright that people get blinded by it. Right? But over time, that's just over the course of the day, how we calculate a chart. Things move this way because this is the east, that's the west, right? But over time, the planets are moving this way through the signs. They move this way through the houses over a 24-hour period. This wheel does one full rotation every day. But then over time, the sun moves this way through the signs over the course of a year. Got it? So, all right, so we got ourselves, took our first breath, we're a person, cool. Second house, we need survival stuff, we need to be touched, we need to be fed, we need to be cared for, need, somebody to have money around there. Third house, that's where it gets interesting. Just abbreviate it. Communication. Don't confuse this with Mercury. Don't confuse this with Gemini or Virgo, the Mercury ruling signs. Houses are one thing, signs are another thing. Houses are the areas of context, the themes of the phases of life. Okay, they are things that we can't control. A sign is a style of expression. It's something that we do actually have control over to a large degree. And Aries can learn to think before it acts or speaks. Go figure. You may or may not know one who can, but they're on their own path. All right. So third house is about communication. It's an area where if you have planets here, those things are expressed through the themes, the context of information, movement because you have the material goods that you need. So now you can start to move around a bit. You're gaining more independence here. Just do it. And siblings on a general level. Why? Because we learn to communicate with our peers, whoever we're around, in the earlier, communication developmental stages of life. So this kind of represents up to age 5 right here, the third house. It could be cousins. It could be early childhood peers, like neighborhood friends, who you have like play dates with. Your parents, their parents have play date. You're kind of learning to talk. You're learning socialization in the third house. And it's at the bottom of the chart because, again, this is still part of the inner world. Yeah, sometimes we need somebody else to bounce off of to learn how to talk in the early stages of life. But you're still developing an internal need. And the bottom half of the chart represents grounding. Inner world, your sense of grounding, your origin. We're coming up on the IC. Imum coeli in Latin. It means something about origin. I don't remember. You can look it up if you want. But that creates the cusp of the fourth house. So we're starting to move around. We're starting to talk. We have, by age 5, we've basically developed our ability to speak. That linguistic competence has been triggered in our brain. A 5-year-old can speak just as competently as an adult, technically speaking. They just don't have the vocabulary yet, right? So third house is where like that needs to happen. So interesting thing about third house, weird things will happen where third house represents siblings and communication. I didn't have a lot of friends or like play dates till age 5. I was like very serious and introverted as a little kid, and my parents were kind of like didn't push friends on me early on. But I do have Aries Mars in my third house, and my brother, who's closest to me in age, is an Aries sun. So that represents siblings. So he was like my only friend, right? So I tend to see connections like that within families a lot. Like where I may have been severely deficient in my learning to communicate or socialize, I had my brother who brought that Aries energy. And Mars itself also represents brothers specifically, or like brotherly relationships. Doesn't have to be a brother. So anyway, we have that part of our grounding. And then fourth house, what are we doing with our newfound ability to speak, move around a bit, communicate, interact with other kids? We may learn about our origin. We may learn about our place in the family unit, our role. So we may kind of start to take on certain responsibilities within the home, certain relational responsibilities. But by this age, 5, 6, 7, the effect of the mother has revealed itself, because now we can talk. Now we've related to others or not. So this represents home in a very general way. And home can mean origin and lineage. Home can mean the home that you're living in right now, the home grounding that you're building, or that's being built beneath you. So you're starting to make a contribution to the home here, because you can talk, you can socialize, you can move around. You're gaining more and more independence as we move around this wheel. So someone with a lot of planets in the fourth house, what does that look like? Or their sun in the fourth house, alone, it could be, is very home oriented, wants to set up their home space for comfort. A sun in the fourth house, again, sun is about one's energy source. Sun in the fourth house needs a comfortable home space in order to retreat, to recharge. The more planets you have in the bottom half of the chart below the horizon, the more introverted you are, generally speaking. Now, we'll talk about unique exceptions to this where there could be one thing high up in the chart that's aspected to everything, creating this big webbing. And it could kind of flip the personality around. You could have a bunch of planets in the bottom half of the chart and maybe like your sun or Aries ruled Mars in the top of the chart on the midheaven or something. And that can make one very extroverted despite the abundance of that, because that planet carries more weight than the others do, or as much as the others do combined. So there are exceptions. Okay, it depends on what's going on. Charts are extremely complicated. But generally speaking, the more you see these themes, how these themes, if you have planets in like these places, would create more of a private life, more private individual, or a work behind the scenes kind of person. So, okay, home life is starting to kind of take shape. Fifth house. You're like 8. Finally, you're 8. All right. So you can go out and play on your own independently in the neighborhood. So fifth house is about making friends. Whereas the third house is kind of about like using the other kids around you or the other people around you to learn how to talk and how to socialize. The fifth house is where your sense of individuality really starts to shine through because you're further along in the developmental process. And so you're starting to reveal that there are certain hobbies or talents that you have that should be honed or paid attention to by your parents or by your friends or your teachers. And so the fifth house is about hobbies. It's about self-expression. It's also, I don't want to keep this entirely conceptually within the context of like growing up. Like, my dad has a lot of planets in the fifth house. He's not a man baby, right? Like, well, he's not a child. He's a man, okay? But we don't call him Wild Bill for nothing. He's a fun guy. A lot of Libra energy in the fifth house, all right? Great, party animal. Okay, so fun happens here. Flings, romance. Any romance that happens in the fifth house has an element of fun to it. So like if you have Venus in the fifth house, like me, like I can't be in a relationship unless it's fun. It has to be fun. It has to have other stuff too, because there are other things connected to my Venus elsewhere in the chart, and that gives my relationships complexity. Or my relationship now. And my Venus is in Gemini. My girlfriend, long-term girlfriend, her sun, and a Mercury in Gemini. My Venus, my love, nature, her identity, her communication style. We get each other in that way. And it's fun. We have a lot of the same hobbies. So fifth house is you're going out into the neighborhood and you're playing, okay? And then your parents call you back into the house, back into the sixth house. Not much fun. Playtime is over. There's one word for this, or many words, but this is the main word. It's duty. You have a duty to set the table now. Set the table for dinner. Wash up. Hygiene. Chores. Homework. Work. individual tasks that keep your head above water, paying bills, paying off debts. Sixth house is right underneath the western horizon where things fall away. Things fall away into the sixth house. If you don't attend to sixth house stuff, your hygiene, your duties, your bills, your chores, you drown. So injuries happen here. Injuries like cooking is a sixth house thing. Cutting your finger while you're cooking is kind of a sixth house thing. I do it all the time. I have a bunch of planets in the sixth house. Cut my shit up all over the place. All right. I can't. I have good manual dexterity in other ways, but when it comes to sixth house stuff, doing chores and stuff, it's so boring, like doesn't keep my mind occupied. It can be Zen. It can be a spiritual experience to set the table, to go on a walk, to, exercise, to take a walk or something. Sixth house thing. It's a healthy thing to do. It's kind of mundane, but it's essential for health. Like you need to move around, right? So yeah, my mind might start wandering while I'm like cutting something in the kitchen and I cut my finger, right? So it's about presence too. Presence with the duty that you have. So you learn to be detail focused in the sixth house. People with sun in the sixth house are very dutiful. People with moon in the sixth house are very dutiful. Whatever part of your chart, whatever planet is in the sixth house, that represents a part of you that has a duty towards something. Venus in the sixth house can kind of seem boring. Like it's not all fun and games like the fifth house would be, right? Venus in the sixth house is like duty to the relationship. I need to have like a deeper purpose toward the relationship itself, the other person, and my sense of like how I perform tasks has to be enhanced. Yes.
What if there's no planets in that?
Lucky you.
Oh, really? No, I'm not saying I am. I'm just curious. I don't have a clue whether I have any.
No. We'll get to that soon enough. No, so it means that you don't get overwhelmed or that you don't place a whole lot of duty or a whole lot of emphasis or value. Houses are about areas of value, essentially. Empty house, no conscious value on those things, right? So it doesn't mean you don't attend to those things, that you can't keep your head above water, everything's just going to fall away and your life is going to be ruined, okay? Because you still have a Venus. You still have a sense of purpose amid heaven. You still have a sense of identity, your sun. You still have all the planets that represent all of these things in their own ways, but more from a place of it's part of me, right? Like maybe you'll have Venus in the second house, which means that material possessions are, you have a career or a way of providing for yourself that's probably quite pleasurable. You enjoy it. Venus in the second house can be very work oriented. So they're very sensual people, but they're very work oriented as well because they probably make a lot of friends at work. Their friend groups are confined to work because second house is about providing for yourself. This is about like doing tasks more so because second house baby who's being provided for, you're not doing the stuff yourself necessarily. You're not providing the context yourself. You like have a job where the material things that you need show up for you by showing up to someone else's structured place of work. Sixth house is like your sense of duty may incline you toward going your own route. when it comes to second house stuff. Like, there's a duty to, because there's so much going on here, so much that can go wrong when you don't pay attention to all the details of life. Things can unravel really quickly. So you either try to find like a safe environment where those things give you a routine and make it easy. So sixth house is about routine. Or you may not be routine oriented at all. So this is one of those kind of extreme this or that kind of things. Sixth house people may be very routine oriented or like not at all. I'm the not at all kind of routine sixth house person. But I have enough good things here to where they're conscious to me, and I have like a schedule in my head, and I just manage it as it shows up. Right. So seventh house, the other, the in parentheses other. It could be any other. Whereas this is the first polarity that we're seeing. Okay. First house and seventh house are opposite. They represent two opposite poles. This is the self. This is your appearance. You know, narcissist, doormat. Bright, warm, visible personality. Self-assuring, giving. Okay. Seventh house is about relationships. When do you plan a date? Around sunset. Western horizon, sunset. Everything is still visible because it's above the horizon. Right? So you go on a date with one other person. It's you as yourself connecting with another. So it can be relationship style. It can be commitment style. Whereas fifth house, more like the recreational aspect of connection and love and stuff. Seventh house is more like, okay, you're an individual. We are entering the realm of the outer world. So how are you presenting yourself in the context of relationships? How are you connecting with another person? You're an individual, they're an individual. What's your style of relating in that way? So you're kind of like whatever sign is on your descendant, which is always directly opposite the ascendant. This is what you're unconsciously projecting, ascendant. This is what you're unconsciously attracting. Because we as creatures who need social lives, we need love, we need certain commitments to give our lives meaning. We have to learn how to connect with one other person. That's only where it begins. So recreation is no strings attached, fifth house. Seventh house is what's your commitment style? We're getting a little more serious here. And what's between fifth house and seventh house? Recreation and marriage, we could say also. Duty. So you gain a sense of duty in handling your own stuff, keeping your own head above water, not depending too much on another, to give yourself the sixth house things, your hygiene, your health, your whatever it is that you do for work. It's more like how you work. You need to take care of your own stuff before you get involved with somebody else's stuff in the seventh house. That's why there's that progression. What happens after marriage? Or, during a marriage? They don't all end, just most of them. Crisis. Oh my God. Divorce. Okay, if you didn't handle sixth house stuff, your duty to yourself, you become overly dependent on your marriage partner, and you are a gold digger or a mooch or, a deadbeat or like whatever. And this is where you possess other people's stuff. So it's about other people's possessions. Second house, directly across, your possessions, your finances, your money, your touch. 8th house, other people's sensuality, other people's money, other people's possessions. Okay? How do you manage that? Or what effect does that context of life have on you? The sign that is on your 8th house cusp is going to give you a sort of vision for those kinds of things, or an ability or inability to manage these kinds of things. But it all depends on your personal development, because, you know, if life has gone conventionally well for you to this point, self, material things, communication, home, grounding, and sense of grounding. So the mother comes into the 4th house a lot. It has to do with your relationship to your mother. It's where your mother's, effect again has come into view. Starting to gain that more independence, recreation, like how you express yourself, duty, other. Okay. If a lot of this stuff is unattended to, the 8th house is going to be a tough place to have planets, So where this is very material, this is very psychological. Our problems are not out there. This is the problem with 8th house heavy people early in life, is that they project their problems onto other people because they're actually trying to possess other people's shit. And you got to learn that the internal psychological nature is your you got to learn that the internal psychological nature is your personal grounding for understanding other people and what you've gotten yourself into with this marriage, right? So it's where things are aiming toward kind of hitting a ceiling here. And as we get into 8th house, is pretty complicated. We'll get into it more deeply, kind of like with the 12th house. 8th house and 12th house are like the areas of the chart that most people fear. Like when like an amateur astrologer sees a lot of 8th house planets, they kind of freak out. They're like, oh my God, this person has like how many mental illnesses? It's not a matter of like what, but like how many, and it's not always true. Like I've met like the most disciplined people in the world have 8th house planets. They can plan things very well because they're inclined toward placing value on crisis matters of crisis, other people's things, tough lessons that are coming about through marriage, through commitment. People in the 8th house can have psychic abilities, can be channels. They can be psychiatrists. They can be doctors, nurses. They can be extremely insightful because they have conscious aspects of themselves in the area that places value on this. 8th house, it's about values. Right? So what happens when you go through a bunch of crap? You learn stuff. So 9th house is about learning. That's one way to put it. People will say it's about foreign travel. It's about philosophy, religion. It's about big ideas. Those are all means to an end. And the end that we're talking about here is connecting the dots, learning life lessons, learning big picture conceptual truths. What's opposite this? 3rd house, information, communication, information systems, technology, atomized facts, information. This is about more connecting the dots, seeing the big picture, And you're starting to learn the lessons that you need to in life because, you made this commitment, stuff happened. In the 8th house, you learned through that. 9th house gives you the lessons you need. So it's not specifically about foreign travel. That's a attribution that a lot of people attach to the 9th house. It's not about going to Mexico and having a margarita on the beach to get away from work for a week or two a year. That's not the 9th house. You're not learning shit. All right. 9th house is about a unique, genuine cultural experience in another place. You live there as a local for a while. It could be 2 days. It could be 2 years. You could move there. People have their moon in the 9th house. They love to read. They love to explore ideas on their own. Moon, processing by yourself. Higher learning, 9th house, nonfiction. Moon in the 9th loves nonfiction. Moon is about home, your relationship to your nurturing, your mother, wherever you got that. So they may be inclined to move to a foreign country and live there, or just live somewhere where they didn't, grow up. Their sense of home is in the outer world, somewhere else in the area of learning. Okay. But they have to find it. All right. Moon in the 1st house is just like, where's their emotions on their sleeve, Because of that, it's the part of you that reacts internally, the moon. 1st house is self, the visible part of yourself. And so that person is outwardly emotionally expressive. 9th house. Okay, cool. So we get to another major cusp here. This is the midheaven, all right? And the 10th house. What do I want to say? I like to break it down to one word just for the sake of simplicity, but let's say status. Next time I teach this class, it'll be a different word, but it'll be the same information, okay? So we talked about the other angles, right? Ascendant, your unconscious projection of how you are can be made conscious. Like a Capricorn ascendant doesn't wear pink, never wears pink, okay? But maybe they have a lot of Libra stuff and they're very in touch with their feminine side and they wear pink, okay? That would be the reason. Not because they're a Capricorn ascendant, right? Not saying that all Libras are trying to find balance. Libra is represented by the scale. When it's making a judgment, scale, it's weighing two sides against each other. It values fairness above all. So 10th house, this is unconscious projection into the world, appearance. This is your home origin, the IC. Unconscious attraction, okay? If you have Mars on your descendant, you're probably going to attract more masculine, aggressive people because Mars is aggressive, depending on the sign that it's in. Maybe it's in Pisces. You may attract people who have a very soft style of asserting themselves. Pisces flows in a harmonious way, style of expression. Pisces Mars likes to flow into things, is shy at first, but lets things just kind of come to them. Pisces tries to be spiritual, at least. When you're at a certain point in your spiritual path, things come to you, things show up for you. So you'll attract Mars-type people if you have Mars on your descendant. If you have Uranus on your descendant, Uranus is is very quirky. It's very think outside the box. It's kind of Aquarius type energy. You have Uranus on your descendant, you're going to attract odd partners. Like people who have some obvious uniqueness about them. Descendant is what you attract. So midheaven is what you project in public. It's how you perform. It's the status part of your nature. So in work, in a realm of competence, you project your midheaven style of personality. So if I seem intense when I'm teaching, it's because I have my midheaven in Scorpio with Pluto right there, right? Someone who has their sun on the midheaven has a very visible personality. We see this almost invariably with actors. My brother has that. He's an actor. Look up any actor's chart, 40-50% chance they'll have sun near the midheaven. Status-oriented ego. Okay? And then 10th house is more specifically about how you put your learning, if we're talking about this in the context of life development cycle. You learn stuff, you learn about a lot of, life's wisdom that it has to offer you. And so you become quite principled in the 9th house. And you carry that over into your public image whenever you're building competence at a task. And so the midheaven is about ambition. You've learned how to connect with others. You've been through stuff. You've learned some stuff as a result of that. Now, what are you going to do with it? Well, you're going to have ambition towards something. You have an orientation now. And that's the midheaven. Midheaven is your peak of your personal mountain of achievement. And then the 10th house is where that starts to fall away or kind of fall into place. And so that's kind of the style that your career takes on. And we'll talk about a bunch of examples of that. Next class, we'll start digging into charts. Doing fairly well on time. So, yeah, people with a lot of energy around the midheaven, especially in the 10th house, are very career focused. They're very purpose oriented. And they may have just as much trouble. They value purpose because, again, there's an area of value. So it's about purpose as well. That's probably the word I used, huh, Kate? Purpose in the 10th house last time.
Purpose.
Oh, yeah, there we go. All right, so people with a lot of 10th house stuff are very purpose oriented, and if the world isn't giving back to them, especially early in life, they see other people making headway in life before them, they can get really bitter about it. And it can be a huge source of distress to know that you have a higher purpose to serve, and that things aren't kind of working out yet. So 10th house oriented people, yeah, they might be actors who have like a lot of success in childhood, maybe even, because they project something in public just naturally that people are attracted to, that people acknowledge, that they can't ignore. And so they say, okay, like make him the star or her the star of the movie, And so that can have an adverse effect. Child star success falls away. What do you do once that gas runs out? Or you'll be a late bloomer, especially if they're more introverted planets like the moon here. Moon in the 10th house doesn't find its grounding or its purpose until maybe the second half of life. But it tends to be way more fulfilling because they've taken their time or they've been through enough stuff so that, things just eventually had to fall in place. And they do. also tend to attract a lot of 9th and 10th house heavy people in my practice. It's interesting. So this could, like, you know, cause a crisis. Like if this isn't being managed very well, it could cause a crisis of identity, because we identify with the purpose that we're serving and what we're giving to the world. And what's directly opposite that? Home, career. The most inner world, the most bottom part of the chart, with the most outer part of ourselves. Public image and our purpose that we serve the world. Inner, outer. 11th house is not just the thing that you're doing or the stuff that's taking place when you're fulfilling your purpose or projecting your status, but it's something that results from you doing that properly. And that is, you gain a more fulfilling sense of belonging when you have found your purpose and you're serving it. So anyone who has planets in the 11th house tends to be very group oriented. They tend to be very concerned with, or again, whatever planet they have there. If their sun is in the 11th house, they're likely to be philanthropic. They care about humanity at large. And not just the purpose they serve, but what they give in a liquid way to humanity, to charity, to groups, to friends. Very giving and genuine friends in the 11th house. And that house represents your value placed on that. What purpose do you serve others, like the human side of reality? And it's about liquid gains, what naturally comes back to you as a result of your doing that. So if somebody's way too status oriented, but not purpose oriented, that could happen in the 10th house. They may not get all these liquid gains back because their sense of belonging, like there's maybe something off about it. They're still like all about themselves, right? But if you're fulfilling a purpose, that's the difference between status and purpose, right? Like a purpose is something that you serve. Status is what you gain in more of a material sense. 4th house, grounding, material grounding. 10th house, material status. Flashy possessions, big house, fast cars, fancy stuff. It's kind of what you're showing off, whether it's competence or purpose, or how you're consciously projecting yourself, even though this is kind of an unconscious thing, the midheaven. You can manage what's going on in the 10th house consciously. You're not a slave to sun, your ego being concerned with your status. But when you're serving your purpose, that's when the 11th house really starts to give you a deeper sense of fulfillment. Toward the end of life, you're going to have less regrets if your 11th house is well developed. Just going to leave the 12th house blank right now. I'll probably pick up there next time. But the first 11 houses represent different aspects of material reality, things we can observe, things we experience, things we feel. And it's also, another thing to answer your question in more detail, Jess, is that, say, the 11th house, so I don't have any planets there. I'm not very group oriented. I don't really think about humanity at large all that much, but how is this void being filled? It's, we need our whole chart to be in balance in one way or another. And people who are hyper competent, people who are like absolutely at the top of their game at something and visible, in public life have a high concentration of energy in like one place in the chart often. And so they're narrow, like hyper-focused on one area of life, and they master it at the expense of everything else. That's why they need a team around them to manage all the stuff. You know why Michael Jordan needed a manager and an agent and a coach and teammates and a wife and kids and, you know, extended family and stuff. He had a network to become the greatest basketball player of all time. Not debatable. All right. LeBron, get out. So we need balance in our chart, and we get it from other people, generally speaking. I have Sagittarius on my 11th house cusp. Some of my best friends are Sagittarius people. And this is before I was even deeply into astrology and knew all this stuff, that I attracted Sagittarius sun people, where they showed up for me and gave me a perspective on what my role is, or maybe helped me to develop my perspective on what my purpose is that I'm serving to people in a more tangible way, not just in relation to my own status, you know, because that's visible, but this is hidden because I have a planet up here. And this is a visible part of me, as it is for you. But I don't have anything being expressed here, planet-wise. So I need help there, you know? And even if you don't ask for help in life, it's still going to show up for you. Yeah. So my Sagittarius friends can get on my nerves sometimes. You know?
You said you're a Cancer sign,
Yes.
so does that kind of play in the fire and the water and the Sagittarius being like a kind of opposite?
It can. They're very different. This hits on an aspect, an angular relationship between signs called a quincunx or an in conjunction. So let's say I'll just use my chart as an example. My sun is right here in the 6th house in Cancer. And, you know, maybe my friend's sun is right there in my chart. So this is my chart. His sun comes into this place, offers me something here, lights something up for me. His sun lights up, provides energy for this part of my chart, right? And so it sheds light on these topics, my sense of belonging, my relation to friend groups, and maybe how to communicate to groups and stuff like that. And so Cancer is water and cardinal, and Sagittarius is fire and mutable. So they have nothing in common. And that's what a quincunx 150-degree relationship, because this is 180 right here. My, my moon, let's say it is. My moon is over here in the 12th house in Capricorn. All right. These two things have something in common. They're both introverted, right? Water, earth. Cardinal. These two things are perfect polarities. Okay. Cancer is the mommy of the zodiac. Capricorn's the daddy. All right. I have my son, my paternal instinct is more of a nurturing style. My more maternal instinct is actually more of a paternal style. My friend's son, so there's plenty of like overlap and coherence in this polarity. They serve each other, mother, father. So it's a polarity. Nothing, this is so different from anything that I have consciously with regard to my son, my sense of duty and stuff. Like, interestingly enough, duty and belonging, two different parts of the chart, but people are complex. So 12th house, we'll get to this later because I love talking about it and it could take a while. So that'll be next time. Thanks for coming, guys. That helps us. Cheers.